This episode of Simulation Nation is brought to you by Avkin Incorporated, your one-stop shop for everything wearable simulator and standardized patient.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us for Simulation Nation. I am really excited to have you here with us today. Again, my goal or objective for this is to always promote the fact that we have accreditation standards and processes, and going for the Certified Healthcare Simulation Educator certification is super exciting and super helpful. So first of all, congratulations on passing your CHSE exam.
Thank you.
I remember when we were at our, I think we call them the after parties now. I don't know if it was called that at the time, but we selected your name as the winner for sponsoring you to get your CHSE exam. And I think as a simulationist that is a CEO and has some ability to make some decisions, not a lot because we're still a small company, but one of the things that we thought about is how can we support people in getting, certified as a healthcare simulation educator. I didn't realize that not every university or school pays for people to get these certifications. And so when we found out that people were, this is something that people wanted was support and help through the process, we were like all for it. We were really excited. So I remember you being really excited. So I just wanted you to come on today and share a little bit about your journey and encourage others that are considering that maybe they are ready for going to get their CHSE certification, or they're considering, maybe they're scared to do it. I don't know. But we want to encourage people today. So I just appreciate you taking the time. Can you spend a few minutes just talking about your role at Elmhurst and what you do on an everyday basis?
Yeah, so I am a full-time faculty educator in the Simulation Center at Elmhurst University. And we teach undergraduate students entry into practice in the lab, but we have ground students, and we are also running programs that are online. So these online students come in for residency. So during that time, I help with the skills lab and the simulations that we run.
Gotcha.
So this is my 4th year as a full-time faculty in this lab, but this lab is really special to me because I was a student at this school, and I kind of had my experience a little backwards. I knew no terminology of simulation or anything really about it. But when I was a student worker and saw sim, I was like, this is the way to learn. I love this. So I learned everything kind of backwards. Like I saw the processes and I knew the steps, but I didn't know which words to pair, like pre-briefing and all this is what we go through, and simulation design, and then debriefing. So studying for the CHSE was very interesting from my aspect because I'm learning all of the words backwards, essentially.
Gotcha. Yeah. So that's exciting. So thinking about it from the student perspective, you experienced this as a student. You became a believer at the time of being educated. And I know as an educator, I was always seeking the student's perspective because for me, it made perfect sense to assign XYZ before simulation or to prepare them or to do something, but I never realized how it impacted maybe their other courses or what would the impact of having their didactic education on whatever it was in simulation before. So what would you say were the big things that you, as a student, you were like, I love that they did this?
I loved the scenarios that they put on that were very similar to real life that we would see in the clinical field, such as stroke or DVT-PE. So I really enjoyed that aspect. And as a student, I really enjoyed that ability to be the actual nurse. As we see in students and learning, they don't get that opportunity to make those decisions and make those calls and do those interventions. So by pushing them a little bit outside their comfort zone in this safe environment was very relaxing for me as a student.
You kind of leaned into that.
Yes, I kept telling myself in the back of my mind that no matter what I did, the patient would live here, right? Like nothing bad would happen. And as a student, of course, during debriefing, I was way harder on myself because we're always our worst critics. So now as a professor, I try to promote all of that as what did you do well? Let's not focus on what you did wrong. What did you do well? and have that confidence that you knew something.
Yeah. I always led with that too. And it was almost like they had, like, if I, in the beginning, when I just said, you know, how do you think it went? They would go immediately right to the negative, right? But when I would ask, so what do you think went well? They would always have to take a pause, right?
Yes.
Because they had all stored up all the things that were like, oh, I wish I would have done this, or oh, I wish I would have done that, right?
Yeah.
So the idea of what do you do well, and that I think changes even the entire psychological safety within the simulation setting, right? Because you're not in there focusing on what they did wrong. They've already kind of beat themselves up for some of those things, right? And then, you know, having them kind of, let's flip the page. We can talk about that later. We won't, you know, it's not that we're going to ignore it, but I think that's amazing. So again, this wasn't prepared beforehand, so I haven't asked you questions, but I just wonder if you have any thoughts on, so transitioning then into clinical practice, what did you take with you from those simulations that you had as a student?
So I really took on the assessment skills. Like I would bring in like, okay, I'm going to know for stroke the BFAST assessment, if anything. And as a student, I would then look for ways to communicate as well. My professors were very elegant in their phrasing of things. And as a 21-year-old student, we don't know how to phrase and say things in a nice professional manner all the time. So I really enjoyed hearing how other people would phrase things. And I would put that in my toolbox for when I went to clinical.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm really excited to hear that you were, I don't want to say a product of simulation, but you had the educational opportunity. Because for me, when I graduated, we had some skills lab experiences, but there was obviously no simulation out there. But I do also think that in clinical practice, when we were out, we had more, as you said, we had more hands-on. We were able to be more, not maybe necessarily decision-making in the midst of some type of crisis, but we had more hands-on practice and weren't as much in the observational role as they are today, which is a struggle, right? Because how do you get them to really be confident and competent with not only their hard skills, but their soft skills if there's limitations on both? You know, if they're set into it at an observation perspective, you know, with our urinary catheterization model at Avkin, the students don't even know what to call the genitalia because they know the proper terms, but are they supposed to use those terms, or are they supposed to use the terms that they used from their childhood? You know, like how do you even, you know, and think about, you know, a woman catheterizing a man or a man catheterizing a woman. Like, how do you keep it professional, right? How do you keep that therapeutic? So, I mean, that's one of many, many, many different circumstances or instances. But I think the idea of being able to apply that in a safe place, and the one other thing I really want to point out is early on in simulation, which you would have been fairly early in the simulation world, you know, when simulation was happening, we didn't know very much about psychological safety. So Elmhurst must have done an amazing job at keeping it psychologically safe for you all, because I don't know that every student that would have graduated when you graduated would have said the same thing.
No. So I had simulation. I graduated from the program in 2015. So then in 2014, 2013 is when I was doing simulation. And my mentor at the time, Lori Westbury, was building up this lab, and she really promoted psychological safety in the lab and within her classes. And so she's actually a big part of me in my simulation journey. And she brought me into this role in Elmhurst, and it is allowing me to grow. So I've learned a lot from her in that sense of she's like my sim guru.
Yeah, I've actually met her. We came to Elmhurst and did a workshop. Were you there when we did the workshop? I think it was 2016. Do you remember that or no? Were you out in clinical practice at that point?
I was out in clinical practice at that point. So no, I wasn't there.
But we had a chance to meet her, and she is a wonderful person. So she had some very intuitive knowledge ahead of time that I think a lot of people in simulation had to learn. I mean, again, I've always been to promote student learning, but I think how to do that the right way wasn't necessarily in the literature yet. You know, we were all still learning, right? I think in 2013, 2014, I was still standing in the control room.
Right.
Like, I'm not 100% sure, but maybe I'd transitioned out of the room and into the control room. But I think that, it was an iterative process, and the standards of best practice are out there now. So that's the good news. So let's talk a little bit about your CHSE. So you won the CHSE at the sponsorship, I would say, but you still had to put the work in, right? So tell me a little bit about again, let's talk for a second about what the qualifications are to apply for the CHSE, because you can't just get a job in simulation and then the next day you're applying to go through for the certification. So can you talk a little bit about what's required of a individual that's seeking to get this?
Yeah, so you have to be in a healthcare simulation educator role of some sort. And as you mentioned, you can't just get that job and apply. You need at least 2 years of documented experience of simulation, administration, or some type of educator with that. And your focus for simulation should be with learners of undergraduates or healthcare providers. So this is my 4th year now. I did my 2 years full time. And then during my 3rd year was when I was thinking about doing it. Wasn't too sure if I wanted to do it that year or wait one more. But then when I went to the Adkin party, I was like, oh, if my name gets pulled out, I'll just die. And then my name was pulled. So that was a real big indicator of, okay, so I have this support of the money and the support from the staff. So I'm going to try to go for it now. And you have to be, I think, dedicated to put the work in for sure.
Yeah. And the other thing that I think is important to talk about is that you need 2 references.
At least, yes.
And that to me, I mean, by the time I applied to get my CHSE, because obviously they didn't even have it available when I first started in 2006. Okay. But I couldn't have gotten 2 references for my simulation, capabilities of what, the fact that I was following standards of best practice or anything. One, because they didn't have standards, but 2, because I was by myself. I was in the adult health section. Right. And there really wasn't anybody that in my institution that knew about simulation other than the maternal child faculty member, who that wasn't her love. She did simulation as part of the course teaching, so she would teach the didactic course and do the simulation, but she didn't love it like I did, and wasn't her full-time focus. And so I don't know that I could have gotten that. When I went to get by the time I got my references, there were other simulation faculty or staff that was there that could attest to it. And then I also, if you are finding yourself in a situation where you don't have, you're the chief chef, cook, and bottle washer, just, you're by yourself, is think about getting involved in a fellowship or something like that, where you're rubbing shoulders with other simulationists. I went through the 2015 NLN Simulation Fellowship, and that was incredibly encouraging for me, because I, for the first time, kind of got out of my own box and figured out what other people were doing and had some way to measure my success. I think early on people didn't really know how to measure success in simulation, and that felt so good to get amongst other like-minded individuals that loved simulation as much as I did.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that would be my only thing about like the difficulty of the application is just getting those 2 references if you are a one-man show, and just for the fact that the application you have to wait until the reference fills it out and then they put that application in. So telling your reference like, hey, I need this filled out in a timely manner is important, because then it still takes 2 to 3 weeks for them to review your application if you're eligible.
Yeah. Yeah. And the one thing I will say also is if you don't have a degree in healthcare education, so nursing education, or, a degree that would follow along naturally with the CHSE, you can still apply for it. So if think about a sim tech that's working in there and is doing some, work where they would want to get the CHSE, you can still apply. You would just have to have a special consideration. So I don't know exactly what the process is, but it's not impossible to sit for your CHSE. It just is an extra step where they have to go through a separate approval process if you don't have a degree in something that makes the most sense.
Yeah.
So that's another consideration. But again, I think so. The application process, as you said, that the references is probably the hardest part.
Yeah.
But then the idea of preparation begins. So tell me a little bit about how you prepared for your CHSE exam.
Yeah, so I really enjoyed that the simulation or the Society of Simulation has a developmental worksheet that it goes through all of the domains that are tested on the categories in CHSE. And what the worksheet is for is it wants you to write as much as you know about the prompts or the questions in those boxes. So I did that. And I focused then my studying on areas that I had lacked writing in that box, meaning I didn't know a whole lot about it. So that is how I used like my method to study. But I also wanted to use, I was a person that I wanted to use all of the free courses as possible, because I do know they do have CHSE review courses you can go to for a few days. But my mentor, Lori Westbury, recommended the Coursera simulation and modeling modules, which is 6 modules, and they're completely free. I then used the Wilson Whitman Price review manual for CHSE exam. And the Society of Simulation printed out recently a CHSE blueprint review reference manual, and I used that as well. And each of these had questions embedded into their courses. So I was a person, and I've always been, I study best by doing questions that are similar to the exam.
Yeah. And I found I did a very similar process to what you did. I don't know that there was paid review courses at the time, but if there was, I didn't select it. But I did use the book. I used the test questions or the practice questions. And what I found, at least my experience, was that those were harder than the actual exam itself. Would you agree with me on that?
Yes, I would agree, because some of the questions when I was reviewing, and then some of the questions when I took the exam, I was like, this one makes a little more sense than the book in reviewing. So I was like, okay, which is nice that those questions are harder then.
I agree. So it felt a little intimidating going in to take the exam, because you didn't know what the questions, if it was going to be, it's kind of like the NCLEX questions, right? It felt a little bit like that in the review course, where you're trying to read between the lines, but it felt very clear cut. There was a right answer in the exam, at least to me. And maybe it was because I did spend a lot of time preparing, but it felt as though it almost over prepared me, which was great. Like you said, I'd rather have it that way than the other way, right?
Exactly.
And I think what was there any, you said you kind of went through and answered as much as you could and found where you were weak, and then boned up on the ones that you really needed to hone in on. Mm-hmm. What would you say were the ones that, do you remember off the top of your head, that you had to work on?
I think the ones that I had to really work on were just with the domain 3 being the largest part of the exam. It's 40%, and it's just all the principles applied. So objectives, assessment, simulation, implementing it. So I think just making sure that I knew, again, the correct terminology, because I learned all of this. I could tell you in layman's terms, but what's the terminology that focuses to it? Mm-hmm. So I think that part being the biggest, because the other areas are about leadership, advocating for sim, differentiating different feedback methods, debriefing methods. And then the last domain is resources and environment. So changing of policies, how do you use your resources efficiently? So I think those areas, if you have experience elsewhere, such as just being a leader, all nurses are project managers, if you think about it.
Yep.
So using those skills for those other domains, I think would be beneficial. But I think I needed to focus more on domain 3, which is the educational principles, really applied in sim.
Yeah. And I would say within that, where I really had to stay focused was on like Kolb's and Coles, and knowing which one was Kolb's and which one was Coles, just because the name was so similar and their theories, they weren't the same, but they aligned. And so just making sure I was being very knowledgeable about those two different theories, I think that really helped me to understand, the why behind what I was doing. I'm obvious. I am a visual and kinesthetic learner, like I think most nurses are, right? And so simulation just came naturally. Like, of course, that's what makes the most sense, right? I can remember be a new graduate, just struggling on the unit to take care of, the 10 to 12 patients, because I worked night shift on a med surg floor as a new nurse, and thinking I can write care plans all day, every day. Like, I am so good. Give me a care plan, man. But taking care of these patients is a whole nother thing. And it took a while, right? I mean, I left and went down to the ER to find my niche because I wasn't as organized as I needed to be on the med surg floor. But I think that the idea of knowing, okay, the simulation is the bridge between, knowledge-based learning and clinical application,
right? That
was a natural thing for me. But then backing it up with the theoretical underpinnings really helped solidify in my mind, why I was doing it. But I just needed to know which one was which to make sure I was answering the questions correctly.
I agree. I think when I was studying, learning all of those different theories and models, that's probably what stressed me out the most, because again, I'm somebody that reads stuff and I write it down to retain it. So I have all these different theories on my paper and I'm like, okay, wait, which one goes with which? And some of them overlap. So I'm like, hold on. But I do agree with you that knowing that theory behind the model and then why we're doing it this way, it does help like everything flow together.
Yeah, for sure. And so, as you were preparing, getting ready to go into the exam, you have to schedule yourself. Did you take it during COVID, or was it after COVID where you went in to take the exam?
So it was after COVID because I took it in January of this year, I think.
Okay.
Yes. And so we had the option to go in or we could test at home. So I tested at home with a proctor on my computer and whatnot. Yeah. That I felt more comfortable with. I've not been in a testing center since NCLEX. And I think I won't be in a testing center again. I'll just do it at home.
Yeah. So I had to go in. And, I definitely think it's preferable to do it as a proctor. I don't know if that's still available or not, but it does, it's kind of like if you're in the environment that you learned in. I mean, again, that's what they say, right? Learning in, right. If you take a test in the environment that you learned the content in, it's easier for you to remember. And I think that would have been the same for me if I could have been at my dining room table taking that exam, because that's where I did all my study.
Right.
It would have been like an easier recall. So I don't know if they still offer that option, but yeah, that'd be great if they did. And so how long between when you applied to where how much time did you take to prepare before you actually took the exam?
So I studied, I had the thought that I would take this CHSE. So I had all this material when I first started in the lab. So I had studied on and off for a couple of years. But once I had scheduled my exam, I really honed in and made sure I put dedicated time to it for probably about 7 months prior to when I was taking my exam. And so I took mine in January of this year. And my experience was a little different because they changed the way the exam was this year.
Okay.
And there was a certain amount of time in December to January where no one could test because they were switching over the way they were doing the testing. And so I took it, and typically you get to know your results right away. But because this was a new test and they were analyzing it out, I had to wait 4 months for my results to get emailed to me. Yep. So on April 1st, which is a very bad day to send out emails, I think, I did get the notification that I did pass. So it was a little anxiety provoking waiting for that whole time. And then after a little while, I just kind of forgot that I took the test, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, so when I took my NCLEX exam, that's what happens. We went to a gymnasium, and so rather than even going to a testing center, all the people that were testing in the entire state had to go to a gymnasium, and it was like SATs where you sit in the desk with a little thing and we didn't know for 6 months whether we passed our NCLEX. Yeah. So, I mean, that's passing your CHSE, like you said, it's not the end of the world. You're still going to have your job. So it's not, it's not as big of a deal, but I can imagine, because that was such angst, just waiting and not knowing. So that's a tough one. Yeah. So, you're part of this is the new test, and this is what, if people were doing it now, this is the test that they would be taking.
This is it. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you use this, but did you use the old blueprint or the new blueprint, or are they just so closely aligned that it's It's not.
They're kind of similar. I did use the old blueprint, and I had used the new blueprint once it came out from the Society of Simulation, and they were very similar. I think the new one really focuses more on the larger domain of 3,
Gotcha.
right? So, but I think they pretty much align, very similar.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's important that they review them because, standards of best practice change, things, new literature comes out. So it's important for them to review them. But yeah, I don't know if I'd sign up to be the 4-month wait. That's a tough one.
No, I honestly, and I didn't realize it when I signed up. They didn't say that I would have to wait that long. So I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah, for sure. So as far as the exam itself, what advice would you give somebody else that's like, I don't know, I'm nervous, I'm not sure, that kind of thing?
So I think you just have to determine if you feel ready enough, right? Like using the professional development worksheet. And if you still have a lot of boxes blank, that kind of sets you up saying, okay, you don't know a whole lot about those sections, and that might be on the tests. All tests are anxiety provoking. So me personally, the day before, I do no studying. I relax and do self-care the day before and just put all of my worries to the side as much as possible. And then I make sure on the day of, I have a decent meal, I hydrate, I make sure I get a good night's sleep the day before. And those are all very important things for when you're testing, and making sure you have a quiet environment. But it's 115 questions, so it's not terrible. And they're all multiple choice. Right. So I didn't think it was too bad compared to other ones. It's not where you have to fill in the blanks or make essays, at least.
Yeah, for sure. And I, like, again, I to encourage the people that, especially nurses, I think, when you take the NCLEX, there's multiple right questions, and you're trying to pick the one that you think that they think is the best, right? That's really not the situation here. It's pretty clear. I mean, you can, hold on a question and come back to it, or mark it that you want to go back. So it's okay to do that as well. You don't have to answer it, and then you don't get a chance to go back and review.
Right. You can flag them.
Yeah. And I think the other piece of this is to say, in the grand scheme of things, why are you doing it, right? Like, what is the purpose behind it? Because if you know the why, I think it makes a whole lot more sense, and it puts a fire underneath of you.
Right. It's that intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation, right? Yeah. Like, if you really want this for yourself, just for your learning purposes, you're going to be a little more motivated for it versus, I guess, if you're being forced to do it for job reasons or whatnot. But then again, I'm very passionate about this way of learning. So I want all of the knowledge that I can have to pass down to these students or these other nurses.
Right. That's excellent. Well, so after you get your CHSE, it's not over.
No.
You still have work to do to maintain that. So one of the things that I, as someone who had gotten their CHSE, you do have to understand that it is kind of a career commitment where you're continuing to do professional development. You're continuing to hone in on, your standards. They want you to get involved in either, an AXOL or Society for Simulation in Healthcare, or ASPE, which is the Association for Standardized Patients. They want you to get involved in a simulation community. If, again, you don't have to do all the things, but you've got, rubbing shoulders with other simulationists is really helpful. Is there any other things that you have come across as far as what you need to do to maintain your CHSE that you would say is like, oh, I didn't realize I needed to do that?
No, they're all pretty simple, I think, and we do it every day in our learning, and it gives you a variety of options on how to keep your education going. So I do like that. It's every 3 years you have to renew it, and I think like the number is like 40 or 45 CEUs over 3 years, right? So I attend conferences every year to learn more and to be in those areas with like-minded people. So AXOL offers you 20 CEUs right there already that can provide you with half of those more than half maybe of those recertification areas. And then the Society of Simulation has a lot of awesome chat groups and ways to communicate with other people across the country on what they're doing. And they also offer those fellowships, like you mentioned. And those were something that I recently learned about within the last year, was these fellowships that you could do with these organizations. So those are also awesome ways to get your education out there and see what other people are doing.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say is Healthy Sim has webinars that offer CE that is free. It's a free resource as well. So there's ways to do this without having to, if you don't have a large professional development budget where you're supported to go to. I know I would have never been supported to go to an Axel I think things have changed at the university, but in the younger years, I was going to other more regional things to get my CEs. But there is, even now, Healthy Sim has online resources for you to be able to continue to learn and get those CE credits. I highly encourage you advocating for yourself to go to one of those conferences, because once I became a CEO and I could basically self-fulfill my own prophecy of putting aside budget to go, I thought, wow, this is huge. And I wish that I had the opportunity to take more advantage of that. But if you don't have those opportunities, there's other ways to do it, to continue with that. And, most of us that are in healthcare, we have to continue to get CE credits anyway for our own professional license. So
exactly. Yeah. And I do love, I was going to mention Healthy Simulation as well. They are a great resource. They're always offering all these different webinars that are free on different topics. And even the ones that you do have to pay, they're like $20-$30 sometimes, which is not too terrible if you're on a budget either.
Right. Yeah, I'm actually, this will be actually released later, but I'm getting ready to do a Healthy Sim webinar on role play in Skills Lab with wearable simulators. So, though it's part of the fact that we support Healthy Sim through Avkin, it is something where I always want to deliver something educational, even if it is something to promote the use of wearable simulators and live people in simulation, standardized patients. I think it's always fun to think about new ways and hear about new ways that our products are being used among the simulation community. So again, really exciting things. And Sarah, I just want to thank you so much for joining us. Again, congratulations on passing your CHSE. And I'm so excited to hear the fact that even though you studied it, you didn't have to spend a lot of money to do so, and you can pass the exam. I hope we were encouragement to those people who are considering it. If you have any questions, again, feel free to reach out to Avkin. We are a resource to help you with that. And if we don't know the answer, I will reach out to Sarah and ask her. So again, thanks so much.
Of course. Thank you.
All right. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.